Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. We're talking about foreign policy under President Donald Trump and the economy under President Trump. We're joined by two guests, Bob Fragasso of Fragasso Financial Advisors and Dr. Michael Poznansky from the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, GISPIA, at the University of Pittsburgh. The president went to Europe, met with NATO, and it was tense, met with Vladimir Putin, and it was very friendly. You know, people are confounded by what seems to be a realigning of who's in the friend column, who's in the enemy column. President Trump has questioned the relevance of NATO in 2018. Is it less relevant than it was? Is it less relevant today than it was in 1988 before Glasnost and the fall of the evil empire?
Yeah, a couple things. So the motto of NATO from Lord Ismay in the Cold War was you want to keep the Soviets out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. So NATO was an alliance as a bulwark against the Soviet Union, and once the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO didn't follow suit. It repurposed itself. And it's worth bearing in mind, as Trump was talking about Article 5, which is essentially the collective defense provision, that an attack on one is an attack on all. The only time that's been invoked was after 9/11, when the United States invoked Article 5 and our European partners in NATO fought and died defending U.S. national security interests in Afghanistan. So it certainly repurposed itself, and it's gotten involved again in Libya and so forth. I think the thing that is troubling to NATO partners right now is the overt pressure and hostility that's being levied against them. So for example, the complaints that they're not spending this 2%. Well, where does that come from? There's no central coffers for NATO. Essentially, the idea is there are these informal and formal agreements that countries ought to spend some percentage of their GDP on defense spending in the event of hostilities. And NATO's a defensive alliance. So pressure on these countries isn't helping when it's done overtly, and Trump is not the first president to complain about NATO spending. Obama and all of the predecessors were worried about it too, but I think it's the tone, to get back to something Bob was saying, that is most worrying.
I'd like to focus on the reckless lack of support for Article 5 of NATO, which is the full underpinning. And if you say, Montenegro, boy, they're kind of hotheads, you really want to go to war for Montenegro? It's appalling. It's just absolutely appalling because everything depends on that. Aren't I right, Professor?
So two things that's really important for viewers to know about Article 5.
Yeah.
First, it's a defensive provision. Yeah. So if Montenegro attacked in an offensive manner, NATO would not be obligated to come to Montenegro's aid.
Correct.
Okay. The second thing that's really important to remember about Article 5 is it doesn't commit NATO allies to engage in military responses if a NATO member is attacked. The provision is essentially whatever the NATO member deems appropriate. So they could provide economic support, they could provide military support, but it's not necessary that Americans would have to, quote unquote, fight and die for Montenegro in the event of a conflict.
Right. And when that gets put on the table, oh, Estonia, they're pretty small. Doesn't that encourage adventurism from, say, Russia, just to test the? I mean, what's going on?
It is the case, and I want to be a bit careful here because NATO scholars have pointed out that under the George H.W. Bush administration in the early 90s, the United States made a promise to Russia that NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward. That was a quote. And this was when there were discussions about whether Germany would essentially align with NATO and the Western powers or Russia. And since then, NATO has steadily marched eastward towards Russia's borders. That does not excuse the annexation of Crimea, the poisoning of individuals in Britain, the attacks on Georgia and Ukraine. But it does explain in part why there's such an acrimonious relationship between Russia and the United States. Now, these countries may be better off in NATO than out, but it is slightly more complicated than either side lets on.
I know there's been a lot of scholarly work on that.
Yeah. Bob, I want to pivot back to trade and tariffs. Isn't the administration has made the argument that this is the time to take these steps when the economy is strong, when the markets are doing well, when unemployment is at record low levels. This is the time to take a chance and be aggressive on these trade deals to set us up for future growth. You don't want to do it when people are struggling. You want to do it now from a position of strength. You agree?
I think it's a stronger position, but I think any time is right to try to make fairer trade arrangements. If we have 20-year-old trade arrangements, even with our friends, and it's become antiquated or it's a little strained at the seams, then it has to be renegotiated. Now, the way to renegotiate it, I think, is with civility and with traditional diplomatic dialogue. That's not an argument for tolerating inaction.
Yeah.
We have to be forceful when our partners are not negotiating fairly and productively. Any time is the right time to do it, but because our economy is the strongest in the world right now, we are sitting in we're holding a better hand of cards to do that right now.
So the other part of the tariff equation is this $12 billion bailout for farmers, because they're going to they're on the receiving end of some pain from China. Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania, has had sort of he'll criticize President Trump at times, unlike many of his Republican colleagues. He referred to this $12 billion payment to farmers as terrible. He said we're compounding government errors, and the pity is that the economy is doing so well. The response to our tax reform, to the deregulation that we and the president have pursued jointly, has been phenomenally successful. Toomey says he's afraid this could be jeopardized by this downward spiral on trade. So we know how Toomey felt about trade. He's a free trade guy, and he's sounding the alarm. He sounds a little more pessimistic than you do.
No, I think we're saying the same thing, and I know, fortunately, I'm fortunate to know him and understand his philosophy. Our industry says history is no guarantee of future performance, but there's no better guide. So if we go back to the 1930s, we did just that. We instituted tariffs all through the 1930s, and we subsidized farmers, and it failed miserably.
Smoot-Hawley.
In 1930, and then we had a lot of farm relief acts, named Farm Relief Act, and those failed. It didn't work. So doing that combination right now. Now again, if that is a temporary tactic to get to a better trade deal, I can understand it. Might not be my choice, but I can understand it. If it's a permanent solution, it's doomed to fail.
Yeah.
And therefore, Toomey is right. Now, just add something with Toomey and free trade. There was someone railing in the parking lot at Giant Eagle the other night about foreign cars. Now, I'm not sure what his mental stability was, but that's that idea of, they lost the war, but they're taking over the country. All right. We can't think that way. And I use that as an example. When we wring our hands and flail our arms around and saying international trade is bad, we cannot go back to the 20th century. We cannot only feed on our own economy here. We're in a world economy. We have to do it productively, and we have to upgrade. I'll give you a quick example. It's simple, but it is illustrative. The simple SOAR lid that municipalities buy. When they buy it domestically made, it costs $600 to $800. Short shipping lines. When they buy it from India, it costs $180 per SOAR lid, and that includes freight from India. Now you say, well, let's compete in that SOAR lid. Let's get the SOAR lids back. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to upgrade. Let India make the SOAR lids. Let us design the water flow system and how we're going to get runoff and how we're going to control flooding and how we're going to be ecologically adept and put people to work at that level. And that's what we need to think of when we say we're going to bring industry, quote unquote, back to the United States. We cannot be an economy insular to ourselves. We have to work in the world economy and be smart about it, but we have to be forceful about it, aggressive.
He's running for president in 2020, I think. You got my vote.
I have not filed, and I will not.
Well, you wouldn't announce
If
it
drafted,
here.
I will not run.
Okay. Where do trade policies and international peace intersect?
Yeah, this is a phenomenal question, and they're related. So the European Union was the economic international organization created throughout the 20th century in Europe, and NATO was the security component. In other words, the United States would provide the security, and the European Union was this kind of dense network and a supranational body to govern trade, finance, migration, and other things. They intersect in a lot of ways. One is that instability in one domain doesn't just remain in that domain. So if European partners are worried, for example, about U.S. commitment to their security, this is also going to impact their faith in the United States' commitment to promoting free trade in the World Trade Organization, IMF, and elsewhere, and vice versa. So, for example, the harsh rhetoric on trade deals, and I agree with Bob that the trade deals, including NAFTA and others, have not necessarily been equitable, although it's complicated there too. But if it were just a matter of renegotiating NAFTA, that would be one thing. If it's a matter of renegotiating NAFTA and possibly renegotiating NATO, that becomes a lot more complicated because suddenly these nations are feeling existential threats on both the security and the economic side, and that's a bitter pill to swallow.
Are there examples where you can think of robust, friendly trading partners enjoying peaceful relations due to the economic activity where they might have been economic or they might have been geopolitical rivals otherwise?
I would say the prime example of this today would be U.S.-China. In the international security community, which is the one I know best, there have been articles and books written about the coming conflict between the U.S. and China. The counter to that is the U.S. and China are inextricably intertwined on the economic front, and that it would be so costly for either nation to engage in military conflict because of this trade that they're unlikely to, and they're more likely to engage in peaceful relations.
But we're going to invade Canada, right? And that's next on our list.
Well, Canada is actually our largest trading partner,
That's right.
as well as security.
And that's the perfect example of what you asked.
Yeah.
I didn't realize Canada was taking advantage of us until I was told.
All right, we are going to have to go. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a break. John and I will have some final thoughts in just a moment.
Thank you.